Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Art and Science of Awareness. Now, on the last Tuesday of each month, we invite researchers working on the cutting edge of mindfulness science to come and talk with us about what they've been discovering. I'm John Roberts from Living Well Community, the virtual library of live and on-demand wellness programming created and curated for you by Point 32 Health and its family of companies, including Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Emma Seppälä. Emma is a psychologist and research scientist, focusing in particular on the science of happiness, emotional intelligence, and social connection. She's the best-selling author of The Happiness Track and, more recently, Sovereign: Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos. Emma teaches at the Yale School of Management. She's faculty director of their Women's Leadership Program and is the science director of Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Emma, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, folks, we want you to be a part of this conversation as well. So please open up the chat. Let us know your thoughts and questions as they occur to you throughout the session. But for now, Emma, let's get started here.
Yeah.
Now, your first book was entitled The Happiness Track: How to Apply the Science of Happiness to Accelerate Your Success. At the risk of sounding glib, for a lot of folks in high-powered professions, especially, the idea that happiness can accelerate success might seem a bit far-fetched. There's certainly a notion that success originates in drive and ambition, and that happiness is, at best, something maybe we'll get around to later. Perhaps we can buy some of it with all the money we've made. And at worst, happiness is something that will make us soft and too obliging and impede our progress. But I'm guessing in your research, that might not be the whole story.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I saw so many people burning out, and whether it was at Yale or Stanford or Silicon Valley. And when I looked at the data, I saw that the way that we're approaching our pursuit of success, we got it kind of all wrong. And so I'll just start with an example. I was teaching a group of Yale students, and I was telling them, actually, when you take care of yourself, you become more creative, more emotionally intelligent, you make better decisions, you have better memory, you have better attention, you have better focus. And one of them said, well, isn't what got me here what's going to get me there? And he had already dropped out of Yale 3 times. He was like genius, like extremely hardworking, but had burned himself to the ground several times. And I said, don't believe me. Like just for this coming week, I want you to just do things that take care of you, get enough sleep, go to bed on time, go outside, like exercise, meditate, do the things that we know from research are going to improve your well-being. And don't believe me, just go ahead and do the experiment. So he did that. And a week later, he came back and he said, I took time to watch the birds. I got up, and watched the sunrise. Like, I didn't work through the night. I did all things. And I said, so how'd you do? And he said, I did everything better, faster. And he ended up becoming a Gates Scholar. So, it's sometimes when things run counter to what the culture has taught us, we just keep doing whatever everyone else is doing. It's like, well, if everyone's doing it, I guess it's the right thing. Just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's the best thing for you. Like, we know that if we are constantly driving ourselves into the ground, you will eventually pay the price with your physical health. It works when you're 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, it's pushing it, 50s, you're going to pay the price if you're not taking care of your body, of your mind, your physical health, mental health, etc. Not just that, though, you do want to show up at your brightest and strongest at every moment. And how do you do that? It's all the things we know: getting better sleep, exercising, eating well, and meditating, doing things to calm your nervous system, especially in a go time, and also a kind of chaotic time on the planet right now. It's like, if we don't do the things to bring ourselves into alignment and to a greater place of calm and well-being, we're not going to access our fullest potential, our brain's fullest capacity for creativity, for innovation, for decision-making, for emotional intelligence, for all of our cognitive functions, not to mention our physical health and well-being. So that's why I wrote a book about it, because I thought, this is just insanity what we're doing. It can work for a short time, yes, but it's not going to work over the long run.
I love what you're saying about the telling this individual to make sure to check it out for themselves. Don't take your
Yeah.
word for it, but
No.
actually do that experiment upon themselves and see how it works out.
Yes.
And but another way I think that you can probably convince people fairly easily that this is real is because there is a science behind it, and that
Right.
gets us back to the subtitle of your book, "The Science of Happiness." So I'm sort of curious if you could talk more about what
Sure.
the science tells us about
Sure.
happiness. But
Um, about happiness or about the link between happiness and success?
let's do both.
Let's do both. Well, let's talk about happiness. I mean, psychologists divide it into two different sections. There's hedonic happiness, which you can think of as sex, drugs, and rock and roll, meaning all the pleasures of the senses, also money, fame, attention, power, all those things give us a form of pleasure called hedonic happiness. And then but at the level of the brain, they give us this short dopamine burst, right? This short experience of a high, but it's quickly followed by a dip again. The dopamine, there's a burst and then it disappears, leaving you craving for more, which is why you want more. I want more fame. I want more of this. I want more of that, whatever it is, right? Um, and and so many of us find ourselves on this hedonic treadmill where we're constantly running. Okay, let me make more money. Let me but what research shows is that doesn't lead to the lasting fulfillment we're looking for. It can give you a short burst of pleasure, which is great, but it's not leading to the ultimate thing that we want, which is more of a sense of fulfillment. And yet most people don't know that. And the whole world is marketing at you like, buy this so that you can feel better, look like this, achieve this, consume this. This is the messaging we're receiving day in, day out, especially if you have your TV on all day or whatever. Everything is deliberate. Pretty much all of our media is designed to deliver the consumer to the advertisers, right? So all the messaging we're hearing. So then what's this next form of happiness? It's called eudaimonic happiness. And what that is the pleasure that you get when you are doing something beyond yourself. Let's give you an example. You may have had a day when you weren't feeling that great, but all of a sudden you have a friend in an emergency situation that calls you and says, can you come help? And you show up. How do you feel? How do you feel when you're standing by your friend's side doing the needful, right? Whatever is the need of the moment. You feel amazing. You feel uplifted. You feel inspired. You suddenly feel so much energy. You feel great, right? And what does the research show? The research shows that when we help others or contribute to a cause greater than ourselves or connect with nature or connect, if you have a spiritual practice, you're connecting to your spirituality, whatever it is, it's actually beyond the me, myself, and I, and it's connecting to something greater through compassion, altruism, etc. That leads at the level of the brain, it leads to fulfillment, because it's not just happiness that comes up and down. It's this sense of fulfillment, and at the level of the brain that lasts. And so I would say, I could summarize the science of happiness in one sentence, having looked at it for 20 years. The happiest people who live the longest, most fulfilled lives, because also the longest because it actually impacts your health down to your cellular level. People who practice more eudaimonic happiness have less inflammation. If you think about it, inflammation is at the root cause of many modern diseases like diabetes and cancer and so forth. So going back to it, I would summarize this whole field of happiness psychology in one sentence. The happiest people who live the longest lives, most fulfilled lives, are people who live lives characterized by compassion in some way, balanced with self-compassion, right? Because you can see that people out there like doing all this community service and then burning themselves out. No, that's just the same scenario we were talking about earlier. I don't care if you're doing, chasing a big bank account or chasing, we just want to help people, but you're burning yourself out in the process. It's not going to be sustainable. But that balance of the two is really, really key. So that's how I would think about that happiness from a psychological perspective.
And it sounds like, of course, we all have the capacity to develop this happiness, but I imagine that we can do things to perhaps make ourselves more prepared to develop those traits. And I'm gathering that mindfulness is, in fact, one of the things that can play a role. Is that correct? And what is your research showing about maybe how mindfulness can support us in developing this maybe a more of an abiding sense of fulfillment in our lives?
We live kind of in a radical time. We live in a radical time because everything is moving so fast. Every year, the speed of life goes faster and faster, and we're getting more and more stuff thrown at us. Over 60,000 gigabytes of information comes at us every day through our media, and that's a conservative number. So we live in an extreme time of high speed, high information. Think about it. Our ancestors hundreds of years ago wouldn't even take in 1/100th of the amount of information we take in per day, right? So we live in this extreme time. In order to find balance, and a lot of people are struggling with finding balance in this extreme of a time, you got to do something equally extreme the other way, which is to sit in stillness. And for a lot of people, that can sound like, that sounds awful. Like people would rather give themselves an electric shock than sit alone in a room doing nothing, without their phone. If they have their phone, they can distract themselves forever. But that's what one study was showing, that they would rather give themselves electric shocks. So that's how uncomfortable we are with that. And I know for a lot of people, meditation or mindfulness just feels so aversive because, like, I don't want to just sit there and feel how anxious I am, how many thoughts I have. It's just too much. And so I actually want to share with you some of the research we've done, which has been on a tool that works really well and really fast at a time when we need things to work well, work fast. And that is breathing exercises. And that's something we've done research on. And, before I move any further, I want to share a story on that because I think that can be really helpful. So you've heard the expression, take a deep breath when you're stressed. And, if anything, it's just mildly annoying, right? But I want to share with you a story of Jake, a friend of my husband's, who he was in Afghanistan, and his vehicle drove over a roadside bomb. And in that moment, he opened his eyes, he was severely injured. I mean, the whole experience is just very traumatic, right? So usually we would fall unconscious in those moments. But in that moment, Jake remembered a breathing exercise he had read about in a book for officers. And because he engaged in that breathing exercise, he was able to regain the ability to think clearly. Because usually in a time of stress or trauma like that, we would fall unconscious or lose the ability to think clearly because the emotion centers of the brain are very activated, and that you have loss of prefrontal regulations. You have loss of the ability to think clearly. Just think child in a tantrum, right? Or adult having a tantrum. Like, you can't talk sense at that moment into that person. Similarly, when we have high emotion, it's very difficult for us to talk our way out of it or think our way out of it. But therefore he engaged in this breathing exercise. And what that does is it goes right into the nervous system and calms it down. And as it calms it down, you regain the ability to think clearly. So Jake regained the ability to think clearly despite being severely injured and in the state of trauma. And he did his first active duty, which was to check on the other service members in that vehicle. He did his second active duty, which was to give orders to call for help. And he thought he had enough presence of mind to tourniquet his own legs and to prop them upward before falling unconscious. And later, he was urgently transported to Germany and then Walter Reed. And he was told, had he not done those things, he would have died that day. So his injuries are so severe that he has prosthetics on both of his legs, but he's alive, he's well. He's a stay-at-home dad, 3 kids. He's amazing. He's amazing. But what he used as a technique is very simple and yet so, so profound. For us, every day we encounter stressors, hopefully never as severe as Jake's, but we can use our breath. We can use breathing. And so I've actually done a number of research studies because myself, I lived through 9/11 in New York, and I tried mindfulness then. I was like, this is a joke. Like, I'm just sitting here feeling how anxious I am. Like, this is not helpful. And I think a lot of people feel that way with meditation. They're like, it doesn't work for me. But I always recommend find the shoe that fits you. And for me, I had to start with breathing. And in fact, I started with a breathing exercise that I learned through a nonprofit called Art of Living. At the time, I was like, what is this breathing? What? But I found out that through this exercise and practicing it daily, I could have more sovereignty over my state of mind, my well-being. And so that's why 10 years later, when I was working with military and veterans, I ended up doing research on the technique that was taught to me by the Art of Living, a nonprofit. It's called Sky Breath Meditation, and it's been really interesting to research it. With veterans, showing how we can normalize anxiety with Yale students. As well, it's amazing what you can do with breathing. And so I always recommend, for those people who are thinking, oh my gosh, please don't tell me to meditate, find the shoe that fits for you.
That's fascinating, especially because, we do talk a lot about mindfulness meditation. Of course, there's a lot of benefits of it, but I feel like we maybe talk less about just the benefits of just the act of breathing. And it sounds like this is extremely valuable research, and thank you for doing it. Now, you've been researching these materials for 20 years. You said, I'm curious, when you first started, did you get any pushback like, oh, this is not serious research?
Yeah.
Or, and well, relatedly, was there something else you thought you were going to be researching and then you sort of happened into this? Or was this really what was always on your mind?
So I'll go back to, I grew up in France, in Paris, and that sounds super romantic, but actually the culture there in Paris is kind of one of criticism and complaint. And as a child, when you grow up there, you always feel like you're never good enough. You also always feel like everything is going to hell in a handbasket. Like everything is, the idea is like it's never going to work out, you know. And then so I moved to the US for college, and here everybody's like, you could do whatever you want. You just put your mind to it. And I thought, wow, this is so much more positive. And people don't really have time for complaints and criticism here. It's just not something you do. And I really liked that. But after 4 years here in college, I noticed, wow, people really believe I am what I do. And they burn themselves into the ground, with this productivity thing where it's the belief that I'm only valuable if I perform, if I do something, right? So I saw some suffering there. And so then I moved to China after college for a couple of years, and I saw people who had absolutely nothing and were grateful for absolutely everything. And they were so resilient and powerful and strong in the muck and the mud and no electricity and no heating in the winter and broken windows and 4 generations living in one place. And they're smiling, they're resilient and they're grateful, so grateful. And I thought, there's something here, and I traveled into Tibet and saw people there, suffering and again, so poor. And yet there is this fire inside them. And like what I call sovereignty, that's why I wrote my second book, Sovereign, this idea of, what we have here, outer wealth and sometimes inner poverty. And there they have outer poverty, but inner wealth. And at the end of the day, I think we're all after that inner wealth. What is it that can keep our flame pointed up, that can keep us feeling strong, sovereign, that can keep us feeling happy? But happy is almost like an overused term, but living our potential, because we feel good when we're aligned with who we are and what we're doing, our expression of ourselves, whatever it is that we are bringing to the world, whatever it is that we're expressing. And so the question was like, well, what is it that they have? And so that launched me into a master's in East Asian studies, studying this deeper. And then I heard a lecture on the impact of meditation on the brain and how that was really starting to gain more traction. Richie Davidson's work, which I ended up doing a postdoc with him. And that's where we studied their research on breathing for veterans. And then I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to do a PhD in psychology and really like dig down and see what are the tools and techniques that people can use to access that inner sovereignty, to make themselves be free on the inside so that they can live their life to the best of their ability and have that sort of inner wealth as well. So that led me to this. And, when I was in grad school, not a lot of people were doing research on meditation yet. And I was told, oh, you don't want to be plugged as a meditation researcher, right? But I thought, you know what? I'm just doing research on what I think is going to help people. And that was it. And I went and did my postdoc again in Wisconsin at Richie Davidson's lab, did research on the breathing for veterans. And then I came to Yale, did research on breathing for mental health for Yale undergrads. Again, we found that the breathing was the most powerful intervention. And so I wrote the books too, because I just thought, there's so much research out there and it gets stuck. It's in some stuffy journal. Nobody reads it. And I thought, ever since grad school, I've always thought there's so much cool data and people don't know how things like gratitude could be a lifeboat for them, how things like compassion and altruism can change their life for the better, make them live longer lives, make them healthier, make them recover from disease faster. Like if Oh, and I wanted to mention one more thing about this compassion finding from earlier. You don't have to go feed orphans in Somalia, right? You don't have to be doing community service 10 hours a day. Like literally, it can be that you are engaged in some way, doing something, however small in your life, or it could even be that you go about your day every day thinking, today, every encounter I have, I want to leave the person that I meet better than when I found them, just uplift people, whatever way, a kind word, a compliment, a joke, just letting people know I see you, because at the end of the day, what everybody wants is very simple. After food and shelter, of course, we want to feel safe. Okay, so but assuming that you have food, shelter, and you feel safe, everyone wants the same thing, to be seen, heard, valued, and appreciated. Whether you're 1 week old or 99, it's the same thing. And we have the ability every day, we have the ability to uplift those around us. And what the research shows is that as you do that, guess what happens? You uplift yourself. So if you take anything from today's conversation, aside from, thinking about, perhaps doing some more breathing in your life, but also this idea of micro moments of upliftment. Can we uplift or say something kind, even the person at the register, in this grocery store, they're going all day, just doing such boring menial work, saying a kind word, talking to them, saying, I see you, like, I love your hair, or what time did you start work today? Oh my gosh, you're doing great. Keep it up. Whatever you want to say, that's kind. But the research shows that you'll not only uplift others, you'll uplift yourself. And that also ties into another study that I want to share with regard to, sometimes people feel, especially when things are overwhelming or there's just a lot of stuff happening in the world, they're like, oh, well, what can I do? What difference can I make? I'm just this one person. What difference can I possibly make? And I just want to share that research shows that when you help someone else, it impacts 3 degrees of separation away from you. So let's say you say a kind word to the person at the cash register, like, I love your hair. You look absolutely beautiful today, something, right? And somebody observes you doing that. They're more likely to go out and help someone else. And it trickles down to 3 degrees of separation. So the person standing behind you at the registers, partners, child will be more likely to act in that way. But not just that, it's the same with happiness and well-being. And that's another place where people often think, gosh, like, isn't that selfish to just think about yourself all the time and meditate and think about your own well-being? No. Research shows that when you're happier, you also impact 3 degrees of separation. So when you're happier, your child's teacher's mom is happier. It's 3 degrees. This is research by sociologists Nicholas Christakis and his colleague looking at this cascading effect. So, if you think you don't make a difference or you're wondering how you can, just know you taking care of yourself and just being kind to people around you, you're impacting your entire community. And you're benefiting yourself.
Beautiful sentiments. I was thinking about, thank you for bringing that up, the affecting 2 or 3 degrees of separation in, I believe what I heard referred to as your social network, which I thought was interesting, because I think that's a much nicer way to think of your social network, is, the people that you might be affecting, not just the people who might be on the other side of your like posts or whatever. I also like to thank you for bringing up Richie Davidson, just because I was remarking to somebody the other day that he's not a household name like some folks in the mindfulness world are, but he's the person I've heard cited by more serious mindfulness researchers like yourself as the person who inspired them to take up this research in some way. And so I feel like he, as much credit as he has gotten, I feel like he has maybe still not gotten as much credit as he deserves for his work. And I love that you were talking. I heard you saying something along the lines of like reclaiming happiness. Like we might think of happiness as being something a little bit corny, but like reclaiming it as being a powerful tool for ourselves, affecting ourselves and affecting our social networks and then society as at large. I would also like to thank you for writing books for a, let's say, not necessarily academic audience, because for those of us who are maybe recovering grad students, it's really nice to have things explained to us in a little more, accessible language. So thank you for doing that as well. And speaking of which, your most recent book is, I'll read the full title here: Sovereign: Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos. So, I mean, you've already touched on this a bit, but when a lot of us encounter that word sovereign, we're doing so in like a geopolitical setting. But I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about what sovereignty means to you in this sense. What does it mean to be sovereign, to have sovereignty, and what forces prevent us from being as sovereign as we might like?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I chose the word sovereign because I didn't, as a psychologist, find any term in psychology to talk about this ability to be in full alignment with who you are and being able to just show up that way, unencumbered by thoughts, beliefs, habits that are standing in your way. And what I see, so I teach executives at the Yale School of Management. That's my day job. And I saw oftentimes that what's the greatest thing standing in people's way is often their relationship with themselves and their ability to their tendency to maybe fall for ways of thinking, acting that were standing in their way. I'll give you a very concrete example. Whenever I ask an audience how many of you are self-critical, 95% of the room raises their hand, sometimes 100%, right? But inevitably, it's that one or two people who say they're not that are most powerful. They stand out as the leaders in the room, not because they're arrogant or anything like that, but because they are not buying into social conditioning or programming, whatever you want to call it, that has led to a relationship with themselves that is one of self-loathing. Now, I know that sounds really intense, but that's what self-criticism is. If you look at it from a psychological perspective, most people, when they make a mistake or not even, are often beating themselves up. And if you think, well, would you do the same to your best friend? No. Would you do the same to your child? No. Do you want your child to talk to themselves that way? No. Why are you talking to yourself that way? Right. And that's why I call it social conditioning. Probably learned from society, from parents, whatever. Parents themselves were doing this. You don't know where it comes from. And in a way, it doesn't matter. But what the data shows is that when you have that kind of highly self-critical relationship with yourself, it actually leads to more depression, anxiety. It leads to less resilience, and impacts your relationships, which are some of the most important in your life. You think about it. If you're very hard on yourself, you're also very hard on the people you love the most and want to hurt the least, right? So that's just one example of a thought pattern that many people are operating under without realizing it, because there's this thought, well, shouldn't I be self-critical? Isn't that good for self-improvement? Self-awareness is good for self-improvement, right? Self-awareness is like, I kind of need help with my driving. I'm not that great at driving, for example, right? Self-criticism is beating yourself up for it. See the difference? But in any case, what research shows is that when you have a more life-supportive relationship, because what's going on is people are talking about, I have a toxic workplace, I have a toxic relationship. Hold on. What about this toxic relationship you have with your own self? It's just one example, right? And we forget that we fail to question, right? Like we don't question things when everyone's doing it. Example, coffee. Everyone drinks coffee. Okay, we don't question it. But think about it. It's a drug that people need to get through the day and that they have to do first thing in the morning. We don't question it. And I'm not trying to get between you and your coffee, but sometimes you think, that's kind of strange. The self-criticism thing, what research shows is it stands in your way of your happiness, in your way of your well-being, but also in the way of your greatest success, resilience, etc., relationships. But if you have a life-supportive relationship with yourself, which basically just means you have a relationship with yourself that's similar to the one you would have with your best friend, and why wouldn't you do that, right? Then there's so much data on what happens. You're more emotionally intelligent, you're a better decision maker, you're more creative and innovative, you have better relationships, you sleep better, you're happier, you're healthier. I mean, the list goes on. So that's just one example, right? This is a lot to sovereignty, but one example of a form of mental conditioning that we carry around with that we're not even aware of, that's standing on our way. And if we can become aware of that and heal it, boom, it makes you very powerful. Like I say, the people who stand out in the room as leaders are the ones who have this life supportive relationship with themselves. So that's one example, but there's many, and habits that we do, ways that we handle our emotions, ways that we handle our technology, that we handle our relationships, that when we just, the term sovereignty is when you've shined light on those things holding you back. Like one of our executives that came through, she was having fear was standing in the way of her leaving her government job, which at the time the government was pretty steady, to go to a job that was corporate. She knew she had the talent. She knew she could do it, but fear was holding her back. And when she said, and once she was able to stare that down, she says, just stare that down and realize it's not going to control me. Then she went on, she's mega successful, amazing, but she had gained that sovereignty over that one thing that was holding her back. So that's why I decided to write a whole book on the topic, because I thought, I want more people to have access. Right now, the planet, it needs all of us to be sovereign. And that's how we also model it for our children, right? Because if not, we're modeling the opposite. And that's how we create more sovereign societies in which people can show up as their best self, but also as their happiest self. It goes together, right? Because when we're aligned with ourselves, when we have a more sovereign relationship with ourselves, we can show up in a way that is also inspiring and that inspires others to do the same.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like leading oneself to better lead others towards better outcomes, if you will.
Yes.
All right, Emma, I could not be more grateful for gifting us with this conversation this
Absolutely.
afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.